I think we're live now. I sure hope so. Welcome to the Shame-Free Zone. My guest today is Terry Chucky. She's a longtime friend, colleague, somebody that I love very much, and I'm eager to introduce her to you. Let me read just a little bit about her. She's the Reverend Terry D. Chucky. And she's the relational matrix of the living love revolution, a holistic sex educator, a priestess of Aphrodite, a leader of the ecosexuality movement, and an eco-magic practitioner. Terry has been generating the Cascadia holistic peer counseling system since 1997 and holding Aphrodite temples since 2000, co-creating the annual EcoSex events from 2013 to 2018. And Terry started the Interdependence and Autonomy LLC, which is a for-profit business that builds consent culture by healing conflict through education and legal advocacy. Reverend Chucky looks to nature for guidance and wisdom. This is one of the things I love about her. She and I both have this connection to nature. She translates the teachings she receives from being with mycelium, bees, and stardust into usable social skills for human beings. Terry spends most of her days gardening, making herbal medicines, incense, and foods, reading, and making art. And Terry also uses the pronouns she and we. I noticed this throughout her bio. One of the things she explained to me about the pronoun we is how connected she is to all the other life forms on this planet. And maybe we'll go into that a little bit more as we dive into our topic today, which is consent and transformative justice, with a little twist. We're going to also be talking about witchcraft. Terry, I love you. I'm so glad to be here with you. I love your temple. It's just oozing sensuality and the connection to the goddess. And it's so inviting.
Thank you. This is my new Aphrodite statue, which I'm still in this swoony, courtship with. I've only had her for a few weeks. And then right above my head, it's very funny because it's behind me. It's like it has its back. But those are some of my ancestors, both my spiritual ancestors, because people like Betty Dodson and Diane DePrima died in 2020, and my actual blood lineage ancestors, who I have them watch over my work. I have them intentionally present. I pray and talk with them so that that's one of the things that helps me stay right-sized and have a clear sense of belonging, which, as we're going to discuss today, is where ethics comes from. It comes from your sense of belonging and from your physical experience of being connected and related to human beings, but also the other than human community.
I think that warrants a little further explanation or exploration, because the dominant culture basically looks at ethics as a transaction, right? Mm-hmm. And you're talking about an embodied experience of ethics. So would that connect us to our empathy and compassion? How does that work?
Absolutely. And I just want to make a little bit of a, you just said the dominant culture, and I want to just reframe that for you.
Okay.
One of the things that we say as a spell of empowerment and a declarative act of magic in the Living Love Revolution is that the culture we grew up in is the fading Uber culture. Because if we actually look statistically, even though we're living in a capitalist, neoliberal, oligarchic patriarchy,
right,
there are more women physically, numerically, in actual fact on the planet than there are men. And there are more people doing different forms of barter and exchange than there are people succeeding in capitalism. And so many of the things that we think are the way it is,
right,
are actually part of a fading Uber culture that some of us are quite intentionally midwifing us away from We are midwifing a new aeon. We are creating new cultures. And we all have the capacity and ability to do that by being intentional about what we believe in, what we speak, because language is actually, a lot of language is declarative magic. Like if you say something, it makes it so, right? That's what identity politics is. If you say, I am a lesbian, then you are, right? If you say, I'm a hippie, then you are.
Okay.
Right? So you're following? So a lot of the things that we believe in are group spell castings or egregores. They're group belief systems. And the way that the fading Uber culture works is that it intentionally dampens, gets us to police our own minds so that we abandon our own imagination, which is why, I just mentioned Diane de Prima a moment ago. Diane de Prima, goddess bless her as an ancestor. I get to be even closer to her than I was in real life, but wrote a brilliant poem called Rant. And the refrain of that poem is, the only war is the war against the imagination, and all other wars are subsumed in it. And this is what she's talking about. If you believe that you're a powerless victim that just has to suffer with the dominant culture and get by on, with one wheel broken, slumpy, limping along, because, we don't get to be dominant. Baloney. The mycelium, right, under the ground, brought civilization and life to this planet, will outlast human beings, have already survived 5 other extinction events. Right? It's human beings think they're in charge, but we ain't, right? So pairing with non-humans, extending our relatedness to non-humans, and hanging out with non-humans.
Right.
Smart. And asking things like, what would mycelium do?
Oh, wait. If we're going to talk about mycelium, you gotta tell people what the mycelium is.
Oh, I'm sorry. People think mushrooms, right, are a thing, but there's really are these long. Go study the works of my brother Paul Stamets, right? He did a TED Talk in 2008 or 9 called 6 Ways Mushrooms Can Save the Planet. And many, many, many things since then. There's a fabulous movie called Fantastic Fungi that Louis Schwarzenberg made that features Paul Stamets.
Love that movie.
Right? So the mycelium are these long white and gray threads of interconnected, they look like hair, right? They're the tendrils. They look like, I don't know, like they're plants, right? They're mycelial threads, and they go under the ground. And it says this in the movies that he's created. Every footsteps has like 3 miles or something, like thousands of mycelial connections. And now, all of this is new science from the last 10 years, right? They now know forests, trees communicate with each other because a specific kind of mycelium, mycorrhizal mycelium, wraps around the tendrils of the roots of trees and shares information and moves minerals and resources across the forest floor. The visuals in that Fantastic Fungi movie are so good.
They're beautiful.
We want to think like the underground that we are, to connect the way you and I connect, right? We don't see each other all the time, but we have a deep energetic and emotional resonance because our values are aligned.
It's so true.
Yeah. And so when I think about you, there's energy. I call it a golden wave, right? There's golden light and energy and love that move out of my physical self to wherever you are. I don't know how they get there. It's like on the waves of imagination or the astral. I don't want to get too woo because I think there's plenty enough magic going on just in evidence-based reality, right? Right? And that's important to me. I'd like to stay with the physical form because that's where all the juicy stuff is, right?
Are you sure about that?
I send energy to you, feel it. Like we're talking on some freaky digital whatever the heck this is.
Which also came out of somebody's imagination.
and imitates the mycelial mat, right? The statement
It
talks.
sure does.
It does, because dark matter and space have the same structure as our nervous system, which is the same physical and energetic structure that the mycelium have.
Hmm.
So
You
there's
know,
that.
yes, it does actually. Dark matter, for those who don't know, is something that happens in the universe, um, as opposed to the things that we see. Correct about that?
Well, it's also happening in us. Like, it's the space between our molecules. It's my personal theory, and this is completely a theory, and it is woo, is that deities and ancestors and all the invisible but palpable things
Uh-huh.
that exist coexist with us in the dark matter that's next to the matter that composes who and what we are.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
And
Well, and I have to now, for those of us who have done journeys using plant medicine or MDMA, certainly we've experienced other planes other than this one.
right, but
And
we
there,
don't actually physically, we're not getting in a rocket ship and going somewhere. It
right,
happens while we're right here.
it's
So it
true.
must be somewhere that is contained within us,
Yeah.
that's accessible to us, right?
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, just a little side note here. Senator Scott Wiener is a senator here in California. I
Mhm.
just saw today that he's introduced legislation to legalize psychedelics in the state of California. So we haven't caught up to you folks in Oregon yet, but
Good. It's
working on it.
honey, it's only what did it? It's only 18 days old here, right? I mean, it just went into
Oh,
effect February 1st. So it's
oh
like,
wow! I didn't realize that.
yeah.
Did not realize that. Yeah, I have many clients who actually have trauma from sexual abuse in their childhood,
Yep.
and it's so frustrating to me because I know as an incest survivor that the journeys that I've taken have had a huge impact on my recovery.
Yeah, because they help us integrate that trauma
Yeah,
and locate it in our bodies and release it and, integrate it. So it's not like hanging out for like a jack in the box waiting for us to trip over it and derail us for weeks at a time.
true. And EMDR can help too.
Yeah.
I do EMDR with my therapist. I'll be doing it later today, as a matter of fact.
Good.
But I find that the journeys can give you an extra boost, and really kind of accelerate the process if it's used in moderation. I mean, you want to go back and work this stuff because
Yes.
it's not play, it's work.
Mm.
Um, and since we're talking about consent violations, I mentioned sexual assault.
Mhm.
Just how does this view of everything being connected, similar to the way mushrooms connect everything through the mycelial mat, how does that inform our ideas of ethics and transformative justice?
Right. So one of the things that I want to introduce to people is an ecological model, an ecological model or a nested model. Now, it's starting now because of ecopsychology, and ecology is a very young field, and so is psychology. Psychology has only really been a field since the 20s and then the 40s, right? So these are newer human understandings.
Yeah.
But I, fortunately or unfortunately, I got a degree in human ecology in 1983, and no one knew what it was, let alone my poor parents who paid a lot of money to send me a private women's school. I'm like, I'm getting a human ecology degree. And then, I joked that I majored in depression. So what's useful about that, though, is that there's this model of how things are, I don't know if you can see this,
Oh,
interconnected.
yes.
Does
Yes.
that make sense?
Yes.
Oh, it's backwards.
Beautiful.
It says Ecosomatic Zones, which you can read about. I have a whole essay on my livingloverevolution.org website.
Right.
And this is also the model that Jessica, what does it say? Jessica Fern uses in polysecure, attachment trauma and consensual non-monogamy. So other people use this too. She didn't invent that. But I'm showing how are things connected? How are ethics in your zone zero, which this is your internal self, your
Right.
perceptive, your internal experience of yourself. And that's called zone zero. And then
Okay.
zone one is your intimate relationships, or like just the space that you and I are talking to each
Okay.
other, right? And then
Uh-huh.
zone 2, what's it say? It says your home and all the things that are in your home. Like that can
Okay.
include your animals, it can include your garden and the plants, right?
Okay.
And then let's say zone 3 says local communities and culture. Things that you, I don't know, your ecstatic dance community, your grocery community, the people that
Uh-huh.
you talk to.
Okay.
4 is the larger society. And 5 is the global collective, which I call the Gaiac bodies, because I like to talk about the oceans, the mountains,
Yeah. Right.
and how we belong to the land and different bodies of land. So for me, the global collective includes the bioregion of Cascadia that I live in,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the main premises of Majick is that what what you have legitimate control over is yourself. Like it's actually unethical to do spell work or cast a glamour on someone external to yourself, right? But it's totally okay for you to do whatever you want in zone 0, right?
Hmm.
So if you put your house in order,
Right.
right, by calming yourself, learning how to self regulate your own feeling states, and setting up a peer counseling system for yourself, right? So that you can have a place to be witnessed when you're upset so you can restore yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Again, integrate your trauma, then that impacts all the worlds, right? So in the Reclaiming Magical community that I'm a part of, we say when we're setting up a sacred space and we're calling in the directions and the elementals above and below and center, as well as east, south, north, west, right?
Right. Right.
We say we are between the worlds, and what happens between the worlds affects all the worlds. And in the same way, when I'm in zone 0 and impacting my own psychology and my own physiology and doing my own sacred sexual healing work, right?
Yeah.
That is going to impact and create expansion and relaxation and generate oxytocin and golden waves of calm and restoration in all the other worlds or all the other zones.
So I want to just back up a little bit because you were talking about how we do magic with ourselves.
Mhm.
And that kind of pertains, I think, to a consent model.
Oh,
So, we're touching into witchcraft today, as you practice it. And I think what I'm hearing is that the idea of casting spells on other people is actually non-consensual.
right.
Can you say a little bit more about that, Terry?
Well, I would say that if you're casting a spell on someone without their consent, that falls under a curse
Uh-huh.
or manipulation. Like you're exerting you're dominating the other person with your will,
Yeah.
right? Because if you don't have specific consent and if you don't ask them if it's okay,
Right.
right? And there's I think I would go so far as to say that the kind of witchcraft that I practice is an ecofeminist model of witchcraft,
Mhm.
right? Because besides the regular Wiccan read, which is do it that will and it harm none, right? Like that you should not do any magic that is intentionally harmful, right?
Right.
I also um, am feel completely embedded in a network of relatedness, so that I know why would I want to exert my will in order to harm someone,
Yeah.
right? One, it's a lot of fucking work, right? Why would I do that unless I
Right.
felt like there was something really wrong with the universe and that I knew better than the universe,
Yeah.
right? So in the beginning of an essay I wrote called The Line, the Cross, and the Circle, which is about how to begin magic, how to cast a circle, and I refer to the Tao Te Ching's verse 29, which is like saying the universe is already perfect the way that it is. So the real way to have power is to align yourself with the natural laws that are exist in the universe.
Oh, I think that's worth repeating.
Okay. the best way to do magic and to gain power is to align yourself with the already existing natural laws of the universe.
Terry, do you know what that reminds me of? It sounds almost identical, actually, to the 12-step spiritual practice that I'm in, where we're supposed to align ourselves with our higher power.
Yeah, that's smart. I'm trying to see if I have that little book, and I don't, but yeah, it says something like, do you think the universe can be improved? I don't think you can do it. There's a time for rest and a time for exertion, all these things that sound like everything turn. There is this. It sounds like that quote from the Bible, only it's the Tao Te Ching, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And it says the true magician, which I would say the true matrix magician, I wouldn't say master, I would say matrix,
Right.
knows that things are already perfect as they are, right? And so you're going to resonate. And when I say resonate, I literally mean sing. You're going to sing an ecstatic song that is like the sound that invented the universe, that caused us to come into being. And when you do that and you fill yourself with that, the power and the strength of that allows you to relax and know that everything's okay.
And my experience of aligning myself with universal intelligence, which I call a higher power, but is that the things that I want to manifest in my life, actually, it's not like I can control my fate. There are certain things that are going to happen in my life, whether I like it or not. That's just what I signed up for.
Right.
I came here with some contracts, some agreements.
Yep.
But working with this universal intelligence, in just aligning myself with it, actually manifests many of the things that I want in my life. Almost, Terry, and I'm sure you're going to correct me and say it's not almost, but I have always thought almost like it's magic. So maybe it is actually magic.
Yeah. Whoa, it's magic, Never believe it's not so. And it's
Yellow, I love that song.
You radiate your own divine immanence. You radiate your own beauty and power. You radiate your own aesthetic.
Yeah.
And that magnetizes everything that you need. Yeah. It comes to you because you sing to it. You call to it. Now, you do have to sing. You have to make a request. Only because if you don't send out a signal, it doesn't know to respond to you.
And Terry, that is also something that people experience when they pray.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So we're kind of, one of the things I'm doing is I'm just looking for the universality of some of the concepts that you're sharing here. So I hope that works for you. I'm looking for how this becomes relatable when we start looking at how many people practice their spiritual path.
Right. And it's also how we apply this to consent. If something is not,
bring it home. I'm dying to find out how this applies to consent.
Not singing to you, it's not interested in you. Do not exert your will over it and dominate it. Unless you have a pre-existing contract in which you sat down and had a long conversation about dominance and submission, and you said, I really am a deeply submissive person. I'm going to create an agreement with you in this moment, and then we'll pretend that we didn't have this conversation, and you surprise me by dominating me in this really hot DS scene. But you have to have verbally contracted that for it to work.
And I'm here to testify as a former pro dom, the sub is always in charge.
Yeah, I know. So it's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
But if we don't believe, and we don't have, it's more than a belief, if we don't have the experience, if our ego has been trained to ignore the many ways it is embedded in a web of communal belonging, and if we don't have the physical, emotional, energetic experience, if we've been cut off from our ancestry and we've done no research to find out where our bloodlines come from and what informs us in
Right.
this physical body. If
Right.
we've only lived on stolen land as settlers and we've never looked at making amends or finding out who lived here before us or continuous with us, because many indigenous people are still fucking here despite our concentrated genocide against them.
Yeah.
Right? If we don't know the names of the land and the words of the earth that we're living on, then it's pretty easy to feel alone. And if you feel alone and cut off,
Yeah.
then this is where this incel bullshit comes from. People actually believe that they're entitled, but they don't bother to have the relational skills that are necessary, right, to cause a courtship to occur. And then they really do emotionally suffer. They don't understand the number of power and privilege that they have, and believing that the only way they can have sex is through force, they enact that out of a truly a sense of desperation and bereftness. Right.
Yeah. Right. I think a lot of times, I think that, and I recently spoke to a man who committed an act of rape, Damian Jones. I interviewed him on my podcast. It's over on YouTube for anybody who wants to check it out, the Shame Free Zone on YouTube. And one of the things that we talked about was this desperation that some men have, maybe a lot of men have, of being touch deprived, of not being in contact with their emotions and their feelings, and actually only experiencing themselves fully when they are in communion with a female body.
That's right. And then they think that's denied to them.
Yeah.
Oh, boy, is that fading Uber culture screwed up.
Oh, yes. So much pain. So can we talk just a little bit about how all of this might intersect with transformational justice? And can you define that for our viewers?
Well, I can, and I might not do the best job of it because I am a third generation Italian American immigrant, not a person of color. And the transformational justice work actually is coming from a historically Black or Black Indigenous person of color collective justice. Okay.
Yeah.
So because BIPOC is the initial acronym that I use for that, because BIPOC people have been disproportionately harmed by the criminal prison industrial complex, as Andrew Davis has taught me to call it. They have a lot more motivation to come up with alternatives, right? So the first statement about transformational justice that I know about came from the Combahee River Collective in 1974, which is a collective of Black women. And what I'm going to do, because I'm about to just speak a whole bunch of, as I already have, references, is I'm going to offer anybody listening that if they email me and put in the subject heading consent resources, I will send them a link to a Google Doc that I've made that has all of these resources. It's called, what did I call it? Consent resources for community leaders. And I'll send it. I think I sent it to you, but I'll send it to anybody that writes to me. Right.
And just for, I'll post your email if you want at the bottom here, if you want to share it so that people can reach out to you now.
If I put it in the chat, will it show up? Or do you have to in the thing?
You know, I think that we are running live on my story, so I'm not entirely sure where the chat is right now. But
what I'm going to do, it's capital I, A-N-D, capital A, period, T-E-R-I @gmail.com.
Cool.
So I&A.terry@gmail.com.
All right.
So that's how you would write to me and then put in the subject heading consent resources, because I want to be accurate and I absolutely need to make sure that you get that anything that I'm doing is built on the foundations of Black feminist work from the second wave that's continued to be improved upon and worked on to now, right? Other places that transformative justice culture comes from are anarchist collectives, and there's a great zine called Accounting for Ourselves that gives the history of different anarchist organizations trying to create first restorative justice and then transformative justice processes and techniques for holding authors of acts of harm, we don't even use the word perpetrators, accountable, or asking them to come back into, Rain Crow likes to say, to come into integrity when they've acted out and harmed other people or taken away other people's agency or ignored other people's personhood.
Terry, I want to just backtrack. You
Please.
said we call them people who have enacted harm. We don't
Mhm.
call them perpetrators.
Right.
So that's a paradigm shift, because right now, popular or dominant discourse tends to be perpetrator, victim, or perpetrator, survivor.
Yeah.
I am actively trying to shift that away myself into perpetrations and victimization.
Yeah.
I'd be very interested in hearing more about the languaging that you're using.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that happens as human beings evolve, right? And cultures actually transform and move forward, right? And I know personally that you and I both even worked at the Center Against Rape and Domestic Violence in the same city in Oregon, in Corvallis.
Corvallis, really?
Yeah, I did.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah.
That's great.
And
I don't
so
think I knew that.
We were part of the second wave of feminism creating
Totally.
shelters for women.
Take back the night marches.
At that time,
Pager on your hip.
And at that time, when women were distinguishing their own sovereignty and personhood, because women had been so deeply enmeshed as the handmaidens of men, let's just say in a shorthand thing.
Right.
There had to be a huge polarization and a distinction between what was male and what was female. That distinction is no longer useful because of what's happened with gender fluidity and trans people. And then right now, for example, a similar distinction and polarization is happening between trans people and cis people, right? Hopefully we'll live into a time when that's no longer useful. Why? Because there has been enough social justice and reparations.
Right.
People aren't fixated on what people's genitals are and equating what your genitals are to your social status. Because until or unless there is no more patriarchy, when the fading Uber culture is no longer an Uber culture, right? Then we can all be like, oh, you're a person. I think you're interesting. We'll talk about your genitals later. I'm just really interested in you. Do you know what I'm saying?
I would love to get to a point where we can. I mean, I love genitals. I think they're great. I'm bisexual. I love all kinds of genitals. But the fact that we make that the very first thing that we look at when the baby comes out of the mother's womb is just insane.
It's only because of patriarchy. Because if we did not differentiate people's value and worth and social status, if there wasn't such a huge discrepancy between what men are worth financially and what women are worth, right, it wouldn't even be necessary. We wouldn't give a shit. We have to do back bends and twist ourselves into pretzels because of that crap. So anyway,
imagine if the culture was focused on toes. Like, well, I need to know what kind of toes you have in your shoes before I'll know how to treat you.
So we're working towards a time and a place when that, is not interesting anymore, really.
Yeah.
Right. But I got lost there, girl. I just went on.
It's okay. So let's go back. The thing that I wanted to clarify was your languaging around, and I'm just going to use what is typically said, perpetrator, survivor.
Because, okay, we needed to have that big distinction because there was such a big, and it's still out of balance, right? More people with access to male privilege. That's another way of saying, it's an alternative way of saying men. Right? And more people with access to male privilege, more people with access to male socialization are still enacting physical violence at a much higher rate than people who do not have the same access. Let's just put it that way. So even the language, like, it's tricky as shit, right?
Yes.
We have to make that distinction. And now it's not meaningful because now it erases the identity or the existence of non-binary, trans, genderqueer people to only say, right? So the same way that we say victim, perpetrator, helper, and that triangulation, that also says, well, I could be a victim, but not a perpetrator. And we know now, in the way we were having a conversation another time about multiple personality disorder. That used to be the word. Now it's dissociative identity disorder. And I'm talking now about psychological language that's listed in the DSM, right?
Yes.
How you give people a psychiatric diagnosis, right? We all have multiple personas.
Well, and that, internal family systems, another therapy that I engage, founded by Richard Suarez. I love what he says. He says, we all have multiple personalities. And as you dig into that and you get acquainted with all these different aspects of yourself, you start to realize that they don't even agree with each other. And it's one of the reasons sometimes that our goals get thwarted, because the many different aspects of us is working against each other.
Right. And so one of the things that's really useful is if we eat our own shadows and acknowledge that every single one of us is a perpetrator, is a victim, and is a helper assistant.
Yeah.
And that all of us have different.
We're talking about that triangle now.
So now it's not a triangle. Now it's like a 12-sided dodecahedron. And what side are you going to roll on? Right? And one of the things we need to do is help move psychiatry and psychology away from the Apollonian, there's only one true monolithic personality and you fold all the other ones in and kill them off, which is how they were dealing with multiple personality disorder when it was called that, and that movie with Sally Fields was on TV. And now, right, it was horrible. Now you're like, oh, thank you, all you beautiful child warriors who arose just in time to help me disassociate and survive an intolerable situation. Now I need to recruit you to a new job because you beautiful little soldier who saved my ass when I was 5 and didn't have any other resources. Now I'm going to give you the assignment of you get to be my new artist helper. You get to go and retrieve feelings and help me make paintings in, ecstatic alcohol inks so that I can release that trauma. I'm going to give you a new assignment because the fact is that we outgrow the traumatized personas that developed, thank you, goddess, right when we needed them and helped us survive. But we don't need them in the new situations that we have as adults, where we have way more power and agency.
One of the things that I think is very difficult for people to identify is the idea that they have perpetrated. It's a very loaded term. We live in a culture that shames and cancels and ostracizes people once they have had that designation. And I remember in the 90s, I decided, my husband and I were on a journey healing the domestic violence in our marriage. And I chose to come out publicly as someone who had perpetrated domestic violence against my husband. Now, it was going both ways, but I really wanted to claim my participation in that. And I felt that it was really wrong that most of the therapists and support groups I went to at that particular time in the 90s were saying that my perpetrations of domestic violence were somehow warranted, that I was just defending myself. They just kept trying to twist it. I knew that wasn't true, but it was very, very difficult to get any traction. I'm glad that now, in 2021, we definitely have gotten to the point where we realize people of all genders can perpetrate domestic violence. But we still seem to really cling to the idea that there's two kinds of people, the innocents and the people who perpetrate. How do you break that trance? How do we get people to start being able to look at the ways in which they create harm?
Yeah, and that's really at the crux of the matter, right? I mean, people want things to be simple because if they're simple, you can remain self-righteous. But it's actually really, really important that we understand the nature of the universe is not dualistic.
Yes.
The actual universe is a non-dual, multi-faceted multiverse. And our body knows this. Because when we do plant medicine journeys or engage in sex magic or are otherwise in a state of bliss that is beyond and below the egoic mind, we experience the singularity of the unitary field of consciousness. And when we experience that, we know things are much more complex than A or B, but not both. Part of the problem is that we want things to be simple. And so all the patriarchal religions, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, they are dualistic and they divide everything. And, you know, early, Shalamith Firestone, early feminist texts were saying, subvert the dominant paradigm. And they were saying, don't fall into the false dichotomy, right? It's not just, here's the thing, it's not just men and women. There's this huge amount of things in between that are other than that. And they need not to be erased and we can't pretend they don't exist. Right? There is a huge difference between good and evil. There are way more things in the universe that are, well, sort of good and kind of evil. You know, I mean, there's like a bazillion, and it's not just a spectrum, it's like a broad band. It's a fractal of kaleidoscopic options. There's no place, not even choosing between, say, Pepsi and Coke. There's no place when there's only a duality. It's not real. That is the illusion that's keeping us chained. And it also is the source of all xenophobia, all racism, all misogyny. Othering somebody is what causes all this fucking pain.
Yeah. So we need to address the person who is harmed has what I would term righteous rage. And they need that as part of their healing journey. And they also need to create healthy boundaries so that they can preserve their safety.
Yes.
But how do we move to a place where we are not taking the person who's created harm and exiling them from community? To me, it seems that when we exile people who have caused harm, we actually create more harm long term because we haven't created any healing for the person who's done harm.
Because we say that they don't belong to us anymore.
Yeah.
And that is so deeply shameful. And it's also kind of weird. It's like we think we can throw out the trash. Where does it go?
True.
Where does the trash go? It doesn't disappear, motherfuckers. It's still there.
Yeah.
Right? And where does that person go when we say what you have done is so egregious that you have to go away? Where do they go?
Yeah.
So we have to create councils and groups and systems of here's what you do, here's how you apologize, here's how you make amends.
And the difference, I know the difference between those two. I want to hear it from your lips. The difference between an apology and an amends.
Oh, well, an apology is where you take responsibility verbally and hopefully in person with someone. And you explain that you understand the harm that you did and that you regret it. You wish that you hadn't done it. Or that you understand the harm you did and you realize how it impacted your relatedness.
Right.
And then amends is actually doing something to change what occurred. And so I would say there's a big difference, and sometimes these get collapsed, especially in social media call-out culture, between psychology and sociology, right? Psychology is our internal, again, our proprioceptive zone 0, our internal experience, and our experience in zone 1 communicating with each other. That's psychology. It has impacts on the levels 2 and 3 too, right? Because how you think about things in your paradigm, that's a part of psychology. But sociology is about social status, right? And so the difference between feeling hurt or being uncomfortable, feeling hurt too, I shouldn't even feeling hurt,
Yeah.
is one thing, but denying people access to resources,
Right.
that's an actual harm. So one of the issues that comes up, and even for me, because I've made this mistake a lot, I'm not good at remembering people's pronouns when they change, and I
Right.
mispronoun people. And I've had a lot of people, call me on that repeatedly, and I still can't. I don't know if it's something in my brain. I have some dyslexia, and no excuses. Someone that I've known for a long time, when they change their pronoun or asked it to be different, I have trouble remembering it. And
Right.
people have explained to me that that's an act of
I do too, by the way.
they explained to me that's an act of violence. And I'm like, yeah, but we need to be talking about scales of violence, because me using the wrong pronoun and not being malicious, I'm not doing it to
Yeah.
throw your dead name in your face. It's not my purpose or my
Right.
intention. And it's different from me punching you in the nose and breaking your nose. Would you not say that's a different scale of violence? And so one of the issues and concerns and problems, which I think is really covered, I can't remember Sarah Schulman's book,
Mhm.
Conflict is Not Abuse, right? Is that the paradigm that we created in second wave feminism to deal with domestic violence and acts of abuse is being used for situations of psychological harm and discomfort.
Yeah. True. So true. Yes. There's been this blurring now. And this happened with the Me Too movement, which, by the way, I love the Me Too movement. But to me, it went off the rails in some ways when it started conflating every single thing, like being whistled at when you're walking down the street, with a full-on sexual assault. It was just like no distinction between those two. And I've suffered and I think a lot of women have suffered a lot of different Me Too moments. And there's no way that I think somebody whistling at me when I walk by is the same as being raped by a serial rapist.
There's also no way to ascertain if someone makes a statement on a social media account,
Yeah.
whether it's true or not. And
Yes.
multiple people have attacked me as a perpetrator of abuse
Yeah.
when what they actually experienced was psychological discomfort.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that we cannot tell the difference between rape and being upset that someone used the wrong pronoun is a problem.
Terry, I just had a thought. One of the things that I think, when I look at myself, when I have conflated one form of harm with something far more extreme, it's usually because I got triggered into a trauma response because I'm a survivor.
That's right. And where does black and white thinking come from?
Yeah.
Trauma.
And we know from epigenetics, for our viewers, epigenetics is a study of what travels through the DNA. In particular, trauma can travel through the DNA. And if you have a trauma burden from your family of origin, even going back up to, I think it's 7 generations, they've proven in mice, you're traumatized even if you've had a life that didn't have trauma in it.
Right. Which is how and why so many people of Jewish descent, even though they weren't in the Holocaust, still have agitated nervous systems.
Oh, yeah.
Real thing. Any peoples who've gone through, why are so many indigenous people still so, right? Because it's still happening. One, it's not in the past.
Yeah.
Right. But also because there's no restoration of the resource base, right? And so you're still hanging out with trauma from your grandfather actively in your body. Right. And you still don't have a foundation of basic resource support.
Yes.
So, well, we need to make the distinction between psychological harm and sociological oppression. Those things often go like this, right? They're both existing. And so the best thing that we could do is restore our own zone zeros to safety and learn small things like we were talking about, this kind of touching and preening.
Yeah. Oh, yes. What was the word you had for that? Preening is what?
Preening, aphrodisiacal. It's an aphrodisiacal skill where we act like Aphrodite and we're generating oxytocin and serotonin by touching ourselves and doing things that make us feel pretty, buying ourselves flowers,
Yeah.
having beautiful things to look at,
Yeah.
right? So we can control that.
Yeah.
And we can make sure that when we get comfortable apologizing. We can make sure that we look at our own behavior and that we have friends that we ask to help us come correct. We can make sure that we learn enough about consent by looking at Betty Martin's Wheel of Consent. Her book just came out. It's now, you can actually get it. All the videos are free on her.
Oh, congratulations,
I know,
Betty.
it's like 10 years it's here. But there's free videos on bettymartin.com and on the School of Consent and the Wheel of Consent websites. You can learn when you need something. You could take Cascadia Holistic Peer Counseling or any other peer counseling system, right? So I have created a form of remediation for zone 0, zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, all right. We need a plan that's going to offer something at every level,
Right.
so that we can transform this culture and live in a new way, right? A new way that centers love and respect and sovereignty and bodily autonomy and consent. There's a lot of people in the world. There's Christiane Pelmas and her Institute for Erotic Intelligence and their upcoming class, The Source of Embodied Ethics. She believes, like I do, well, how do you know what you want? Oh, you have to actually feel in your own body. Where does desire arise in my body? Because for many of us, especially people socialized as cis females, it's actually verboten to think about what you want because you're busy being trained to serve other people.
So true. By the way, I'm reading a book right now by that very name. It's called Want, and it's by Julie Peters. She's a yoga teacher. I don't
Send it to
think
me.
she's
I
written
love
one
it.
book before this. It's a great book. I love the way she goes through. One of the ways that we get to our desire is first we've got to process our anger.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Terry, you excite a lot of neurons up here for me.
That's so sexy, isn't it? It's a sexual thing.
Yes, it's definitely. And I would love for our viewers to know a little bit more about what you can do for them, how they can reach you.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the best way is to send me an email at that email address, ina.terry@gmail.com. You can also go to livingloverevolution.org. I have a media page on there. I have like some videos set up on there. And I have, my essays are there in the different tabs. Also, you can go to aphroditetemple.com. That's a website where I do quarterly Aphrodite temples. Even though we're not doing them in person now, we're doing them on Zoom. We've figured out ways to do trance work and bodhicitta together. And Ecomagic, what is it? I will, if people write to me that email, I will send them a little package of things. So I'm actually not doing session work right now because I'm pivoting to be an artist. I'm having so much fun. But I do still do Aphrodite temples, and my students like Helena and Misha and Sarah Bell, they're teaching the classes that I used to teach. But see, this is what I'm doing now. I'm like making drawings of men with flower beards, right?
Wow.
I know. I'm having so much fun.
And when is your book coming out, Terry?
I don't know. As soon as I finish drawing it, I'm actually really focusing now on visual language and trying to get back to the wild child self that I stuffed in a box. I really want to, during this time, who knows how long it's going to be, when we have enforced social isolation, I've really been getting in touch with my introvert. And I am making art though. I'm going to make a Patreon thing, I think by spring equinox, so that people can get their hands on my art. I'm making stickers. I'm having so much fun. I made a hilarious snail named Silly Sally, which is really fun. Right? So,
you said you're having a love fest with snails right now. What's that about?
I am. Veronica, they're so cool. Okay, here's my cool snail, right?
Oh, well, look at that? Hello. What
Pretty
a
high femme, right? So I'm having a lot of queerdo, extravagant fun.
honey, that's great. That is just great. One of the things I'm reminded of, we touched upon witchcraft,
Mhm.
and witchcraft is, as I understand it, really is spiritual practice that's just connected to the earth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And
and
learning about
all her
history.
creatures.
Yeah, and being able to express your love and concern and relationship for the personhood of non-humans, like my cat, the trees, my dahlias and my dahlia garden. Oh my God, I love those things.
Mm,
And just looking at how we are in communion with them in a non-verbal way, which is why that nonverbal art is so interesting to me. Because I know when I was a child, I felt that unity consciousness. It was effortless. I was like born into it. And I had to learn to turn it off or turn away from it or subjugate it. And
oh my God, yes.
I
Yes,
want to
yes, yes.
recapture it because I think the purity, not to be I should be careful with purity, but I mean the effortlessness of that kind of consciousness and the
Terry,
joy that's in it. I'm
I
really
stayed up till 3 a.m. this morning working on it's actually a short article, but I just put so much of my heart and soul into it. And it's about my dog Shakina, who was killed by a car back in 2008 on February 18th. So today marks her 13th anniversary of her death.
I'm sorry.
And I have been in contact with her periodically over these 13 years. As a matter of fact, she came to my current partner. We've been together now for over 10 years. She came to him in a dream and
Wow, cool.
told him that she was really glad that he was going to be with me on the day of her death. And that was 10 years ago.
That's amazing.
And he had no idea, who is this dog and why is she glad I'm going to be with you on February 18th? And I just about lost it. I was like, that's Shakina. She's talking to you. And as a dog lover, I'm kind of like, hey, if my dog doesn't like you, I'm not sure you're for me. And I'm
Mhm.
like, this happening on the other side, right?
That's so beautiful.
So the piece that I wrote, Terry, is called Tantric Dogs, and it's
Ah,
all about the sexual journey between her and my other dog, Blanco,
you
which
have to send it to me.
blew my mind. It is not at all mating, that terrible word we use to try to
Right.
push animals away and make them separate from us.
Mm-hmm.
It was really just a beautiful romance. So I just told
Nice.
that story last night. Yeah,
Will you send it to me? I'd love to see it.
I will send it to you. And I'll also post it below here.
Great.
And I think before we go, it would be great to call out the land that we're living on. I want to say that I'm living on Nisanan land, and I actively support that particular tribe with donations. And
Great.
yeah,
I live on, there's a lot of people, Multnomah, huge bands of Colombian tribe people, which are Clackamas, Tualatin. I mean, there's like a list of 15 because lots of people came in the summer and hung out together and traded in the Columbia Gorge area all
right.
along that. There's still some people, and also when I lived, there's Camas loving people. That the word Dumas means home. What is that? I'm not remembering everybody's name right now. I feel a little embarrassed about that.
Oh, don't be.
I wasn't prepared, but I really love learning more
Yeah.
about it. And I tried to support One Sky Nation as a local organization that provides resources and the local Indian country news and all
Yeah.
of that. I direct people there to go and find out how do you know whose land you're on. That's really helpful.
I think I love that I'm seeing this more and more in a lot of Zooms where people are calling out the land that they're on, which I think is a nice remembrance. Terry, I love you dearly. And thank you so much for blowing all the circuits in our brains today. And And I'll close with a Wicca blessing and say, "Blessed be."
Blessed be. Thank you, friend.
Love you.